So cinemas and theatres seem to be dying a slow death during this pandemic and quarantine. And many people are fearing the future of what that means for film. But I see it as a good thing and something that needs to happen if cinemas and theatres want to keep on going and want to make an impact that they used to have. What's happening right now to cinema and theatre is a good thing. When cinemas first started, it wasn't just movies that were bringing people in. They also showed the news, they also showed some light entertainment, they also showed some cartoons. They then changed as the celebrities started to come out from all these movies that were being made in the 30s and 40s, and then in the 50s and 60s, cinema became really big, and you had some massive players come into the fold like Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. The different storylines they were coming up with, the different genres they were creating, the way they were mixing it up, the way they were discovering new technology, the way they were discovering new light effects. Everything went into impressing the general public, and cinema has, especially Hollywood, has always had to be on the bandwagon, whether that be of genres that are happening to the extent that they saturate a genre market, such as the westerns or sci-fi or fantasy, and now genres can be anything they want as they come out. They haven't got to be spaghetti westerns of the 70s. They haven't got to be the sci-fi post-apocalyptic vision of the 80s. They haven't got to be the communist witch hunts of the 50s. You know, these genres aren't there so much per decade. They're all out there at one go now, saturating the market. And this pop culture that Hollywood has always had to be relevant and remain on top of to sell their movies has now started to crush them, because internet companies have to police their own sites whilst making monies. They have to take into account laws that govern them and the way that they do their internet. So if it's offensive, they can't show it because of X law that doesn't actually pertain to the internet, but because these laws do exist, they have to remain working within these laws within their countries, even though the internet's a worldwide thing. The internet scopes what pop culture is through these laws, which are in effect because of other reasons that have nothing to do with internet. They have to do with newspapers, they have to do with anarchy, they have to do with, well, keeping people safe was why these laws came in, but now it seems to be controlling people because of how much the landscape has changed. So the internet has decided what is pop culture rather than movies deciding what is pop culture. And Hollywood had to jump on that bandwagon to keep themselves relevant. And this has started, or has almost completely destroyed Hollywood filmmaking, scripts you can get, genres you can do, experimentation within cinema. They no longer subtly point out conversation pieces or general ideas and conversations which seem to be floating around their peripheral at that time, because they can see it all through the internet. So they're jumping on the pop culture of what they believe to be the pop culture of the world. But Hollywood seems to be the one at the center of it, even though Bollywood makes more money. TV took over cinema ages ago. When TV started, it was terrible, it was fuzzy, you couldn't really see it, you couldn't really hear it. Then technology got better, so you could see the screen, you could hear the screen. Sets wobbled, the acting wasn't as good, the writing wasn't as good. And then by the time the 90s came around, all of this had been worked on so much to the extent that things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad came out, all these things changed the landscape of TV and how people viewed and saw the entertainment that was coming out from their TV. They didn't see it as just a quick escape from the world or a place to gather informational facts about what had been happening in the world, compared to cinema being a complete escapism from the world. Things like Sex and the City, Sopranos, Buffy, HBO took away the power of the cinema, and now, thanks to the internet, technology becoming even better, streaming becoming even better, politicians lobbying for the internet, how everything has become a streaming service. So you've got Netflix, you've got Apple TV, you've got all of these competing with Hollywood, and especially now during the quarantine, and so many films that should be released in cinemas are now being released onto streaming services, which, even though you'll probably spend 15, 10, 20 pounds to watch this new movie that's come out, it still beats having to spend £20 per person to go and see it at the cinema. So when you buy your ticket, that's a tenner, and by the time you've got your food, that's almost a tenner, and then you've gone in with 5 mates, so that's like £100 almost that you've spent just to go see a movie. And now you can watch the exact same movie for 20 quid. And it doesn't matter how many people are watching your TV, you've just spent 20 quid. So if cinemas want to revive, they have to, in my opinion, go back to the eras of the 60s, 70s and 80s, where they're picking up these new talents from things like YouTube or Vivo or Trigger Street, and they have to look at these independent movies. So if you look at things like The Evil Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even John Wick, A Quiet Place, they're all kind of independent movies that are coming out, and these are the movies people want to see. These are the movies who people love cinema, they want to go see. People want to see they do want to know about the general celebrity news, not like the entertainment news does, but kind of like what movies are coming out, reviews of movies, behind the scenes of movies. This is what sold DVDs when they came out, was the behind the scene footage, the photographs, the interviews with the actors. This is what helped sell Film 4 when that came out. It would go behind the scenes, it would show you trailers, it would have interviews with directors, interview with actors. I personally think when the cinemas reopen, they should kind of have a segment beforehand which goes behind the scenes of some of the movies that are coming out, have quick interviews with some of the actors and directors of future films, of movies that are coming out, of other projects they're doing. You should still have your trailers in there, much like they used to back in the 1940s, so you were getting a full-on experience for the money that you had put down. And this is what Hollywood needs to do today if they want to keep money coming in and keep relevant, is going back to the days of The Evil Dead, El Mariachi and things like that, which only cost a couple of grand to make, but made millions back as it slowly went from one side of America to the other. And by the time it had garnered all this conversation and all these reviews, things like The Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre were already banned before they could even be shown in Europe. Which makes you think, why would they want to go to that? Wouldn't that damage Hollywood? No, because the guy who wrote and directed Evil Dead wrote and directed Superman 1, 2, 3 in the early 2000s with Tobey Maguire in it. So his career took off. The person who did El Mariachi went on to do Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, Shark Boy and Lava Girl, Spy Kids. All these people came out from cult-following movies. It's cult-following movies such as The Quiet Place and John Wick of today that Hollywood really needs to go into. They need to get away from trying to be on top of the pop culture, and they need to be back on top of bringing people in. All these people whose industries are completely saturated with all these people putting themselves into debt, they now need to come forward. There's enough platforms out there for streaming, for TV and for cinema, but if Hollywood wants to remain relevant, they have to go back to their indie roots. They have to go back to their starting points. All of this always happens with any industry, with any relevant market. It always goes around in a circle, or else they can just wait for the bubble to pop. New metal had to wait for the bubble to pop, and now there's just a sprinkling of bands doing new metal-esque type music out there. The comic book industry is reverting back to what it used to be before, with more projects on things like Indiegogo getting more funding than Marvel or DC can hope to make in a month, releasing supposedly top of the range comic books. Pop culture's bubble has burst its banks as well, with the SJWs and everybody rioting and everybody doing this. The internet has basically burst its bubble with the saturation of so many different viewpoints, but that is the point of the internet, and that's what Hollywood is becoming. So to get away from this echo chamber and to stop the bubble from bursting, it needs to deflate back down to its roots, back down to what made it what it was. And they need to start having people coming in from these purely independent routes who, if you look at their short movies, the production value is probably terrible, the effects are probably bad, and the acting might not be good, but the script writing's there. The directing could be there. Or maybe the script writing and directing is bad, but somehow you've watched this one actor really shine through, and they should take him, sign him up to a studio for like 5 or 6 movies which they think are going to sell really well. Take the guy who plays Henry in Stargirl. In fact, take Stargirl, and that pretty much shows you that people have had enough of the pop culture stuff and they want to see a good script, good directing, and good acting with a storyline that brings them something different, something they haven't seen before, especially with Stargirl Season 1, Episode 11. That one is such a shocking episode to actually watch, and to realise that cinema and movies don't do this. They do A, B, C, D, E, F steps. They do what sells, and they need to break away from that, and they need to get back to their indie experimental roots and bring forward independent unknown people to be the next Spielberg, to be the next George Lucas, to be the next Keanu Reeves, to be the next Brad Pitt, to be the next whatever. They need to get back into just having fun with the industry, much like the music industry was. The music industry was owned and funded by a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, but you still had punk come out, you still had metal come out, you still had indie music come out, because they didn't care as long as it made money. They didn't care what it was like, they didn't have to get it themselves. And people in Hollywood these days want to be so relevant and so on pop culture that they have to get it themselves and push this message to sell this movie. It can't just be about the movie. It can't just be about the directing. It can't just be about what they were experimenting with or what they were trying to do, and then see if it just makes money or if it doesn't make money. Now they just want it to make money and they want it to make over £1 billion. Well, now you're not going to get that anymore. The only time you will get your £1 billion films is when they're your summer blockbusters. And every year there should only be about 2 summer blockbusters. Back in the 90s, you look forward to your 1 summer blockbuster, and everything else was different. Even film festivals have taken away from that, because now they just show these movies in film festivals to people who are already in the industry. They're not showing these films to the mass market people who will give them money. They need to take the movies that are in these film festivals and just slowly release them like they did with The Evil Dead. And that worked, and it keeps an industry alive because it keeps it at a slow boil instead of a quick boil, which will make the bubble burst even quicker, which is what they've been doing for the last 20 years, is just seeing this bubble get bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's burst. So if they want to retain it, keep the bubble coming back in on itself, back down to its roots and back down to its independent way. And that's why I think cinema could actually thrive from the pandemic and quarantine that is happening now when they reopen, by doing independent, unknown actors, unknown directors, and have people walk past the cinema, stop, look at the poster, go, I haven't heard of that, I haven't seen that, that looks interesting, I will spend some money on it. But we'll see which way they go. Do they keep clinging on to the bubble which is about to burst, or do they go back down to the roots and let the bubbles deflate a bit so that they can then rebuild it? Only time will tell.